So our first nonfiction book today is by American author Anvi Hoàng. And this is Why Do You Look at Me and See a Girl? To introduce Anvi, Anvi Hoàng grew up in Vietnam and taught English as a second language for 6 years before coming to the US for graduate studies. In 2015, she co-founded and as Chief of Operations has since managed the Vietnamese American Society for Creative Arts and Music, VASCAM. Why Do You Look at Me and See a Girl is her debut book. She lives in Bloomington, Indiana, with her husband, composer PQ Phan. Please welcome Anvi.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks everybody in the audience for being here. It's an honor to be a Guernica's author. I have to say, I like Guernica's slogan a lot. No borders, no limits. I believe it's always fitting for our world when diversity, not just in skin color, but also culture, religion, gender, sexuality, etc., is such a common part in life and should be considered as such. And yet, we fight for that diversity every single day of our life. I want to be a part of that fight. That's one of the reasons I wrote this book. Why Do You Look at Me and See a Girl? It's part memoir, part social criticism. It's about my journey in life as a human being and a woman in Vietnam. I came to the US for graduate study and became a woman of color, a minority, an Asian woman, a Vietnamese girl, an alien resident, an outsider. All those labels, I learned about their meanings and implications over time. The first few years I was here, people, mostly white, told me, "You are brave to have come to a strange country to study." It was just a simple comment that I didn't have a simple response to. Those people were kind to me, obviously, but in my thinking, people moving around because of life seems a natural thing to do. What's the big deal, I thought. But of course, immigration or migration was and still is a very thorny issue. To some people, I can be brave. To others, I can be dangerous. I can be a threat. I can be a disease. So perception is one very important thing to which I need to pay close attention in America. With so much freedom and complexity and problems around, I have to think about it constantly. I'm going to read an excerpt about my time at Brigham Young University, where I received a scholarship to join a master's program in American Study. It was 2001. It was true. I felt like a fish in water in most ways, even when I was a lost fish in the ocean without a school of her own. Being a foreigner in the new land, time was a confusing element. Everything in America had a deadline: electricity, gas, water, telephone bills. Doctor appointments had time slots. We planned gatherings with friends on an agreed upon date, weeks or months in advance. There is something due every day. Life is regulated by specific numbers. They branched wide, they angulated, they caged me in. To keep up with these numbers was stressful and depressing in a way, as they made me feel confined and helpless in a box of time made out of lines. I stretched them out in my mind, and all I saw was a long line punctuated with markers. I could only move from one point to the next on this flat line. How bizarre to walk on a flat line to go through life. I did not find the rhythm to it. This was American linear thinking, I figured. Back home, I was used to a sphere where I could jump everywhere. There were no due dates or deadlines. Around the end of the month, utilities agents come to our house and collect the money without advance notice of any kind. They knock on the door. If we are not around, they come back another time. Or we leave some money with our neighbors to pay the bill and get the receipt for us. If I was suddenly in the mood to see my friend, I walked or biked over. One time, a bunch of us biked 16 miles from Saigon to Hóc Môn to see a friend who happened to be out. We paddled back in the scorching heat, pumping each push with stories that overflew our memory reservoir for 40 years to come. Spontaneity was the scent of life. Money, people, and time flowed fluidly. There was a sense of romance and relaxation in this way of living. It took me a long time to figure out how to stay on the flat line and to appreciate its value, which was a lesson I learned in conjunction with my linguistic battle with time. Monday morning, I met Dee in our graduate office. "Did you have a nice weekend?" he asked. "Yes, I did." Dee smiled. "Yeah? What did you do?" "I went to visit a friend over by the park." I stuttered, feeling annoyed by the pause in my head. Ever since I arrived in the US, my battle with English verb tenses was ongoing. The moment I opened my mouth to talk or sat down to write papers, I found myself thinking hard to choose a verb, which sometimes has to be in the present and other times the past. I consumed seconds to clarify with myself. Conjugating the verb tenses before spitting them out became the routine spasm between me and the English grammar. In the Vietnamese language, there is no requirement to conjugate verbs. There are a few denominations to indicate the present, the past, and the future, but which are not used all the time. The context plays a crucial role to clarify temporal indication. I would say that the Vietnamese language sounds present to me, as if Vietnamese people live and fight and die and pass on their spirit over generations seamlessly. That things evolve circularly in whatever direction there may be, all sharing one point of return, life. Everything fuses into everything else, not leading forward as in a linear line in periods of time, the way I have seen history divided in American textbooks. I would record an old story and did not have to use simple past. The use of the present tense made it seem more real. In English, I need to be clear about the use of the tenses. I rely on my knowledge of English grammar to make it sound right, even when in my Vietnamese thinking it may not make sense. As I moved along, the more I thought about the time issue and the more back and forth I went between the two languages, the more confused I became linguistically, but more transcendent mentally. An old friend died today. That person has already become, he was a wonderful father. My instinctive reaction to the words would be, how ridiculous, I just saw him yesterday. In my circular mind, 100 years ago could still be present. Today could not be the past. But yes, of course it could. Even a second ago was already the past. It took me a long time to accept the logics of time in the English language, to get used to using the simple past this way. But I knew such a word would continue to shake me. Every time I read or heard an obituary, I couldn't help but hang on to the past tense verbs and freeze time, waiting. The verbs would ring in my ears like a drop of water that falls into a pond and ripples. I wait till they fall flat, sink in me, returning to the still surface, quiet, making me feel that the person was already really dead. Then everyday noise resumes. Thank you.